The alien's three eyes widened in horror as it watched the human move through the space station corridor. Lieutenant Marcus Webb wasn't running. He was gliding, his body low and smooth, each step deliberate and soundless despite the chaos erupting around them. The Kralith warrior had seen many species fight in its 2 centuries of military service, but nothing prepared it for this. "They're hunting us," the alien whispered into its communicator, mandibles clicking with fear. "The humans aren't fighting back." The distress call had gone out 3 hours ago. The Zareth Dominion had breached Outpost 72, overwhelming the multi-species garrison with sheer numbers. Standard protocol demanded a defensive retreat to the core sectors while awaiting reinforcement. The humans had other plans. Webb paused at a junction, his head tilting slightly as he listened. His partner, Specialist Katie Ross, emerged from a ventilation shaft above, landing without a sound beside him. She held up 2 fingers, then pointed down the left corridor. Webb nodded and they separated, each taking a different path into the darkness. The Zereth were apex predators on their homeworld, 7 feet of armored muscle with reflexes fast enough to snatch flying prey from midair. They had conquered 42 systems in less than a decade. Their shock troops were feared across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. None of that mattered now. The first Zereth died without seeing its killer. One moment it was advancing with its squad, the next it was on the floor, neck broken, its weapon gone. The other spun around, sensors scanning, but found nothing. Then another fell. Then another. Katie moved through them like smoke, exploiting every shadow, every blind spot in their enhanced vision. The Zereth were built to hunt warm-blooded prey in bright daylight. They had never evolved to fight something that understood darkness as an ally, that could move without triggering motion sensors, that could calculate firing angles and response times in fractions of a second. Webb appeared behind the last 3, rising from a maintenance access they hadn't even noticed. His blade work was surgical, efficient, over in heartbeats. He collected their ammunition and kept moving. In the command center, Commander Vex of the Krylith watched the security feeds with growing disbelief. 40 human soldiers had been stationed at the outpost, 40 against 3,000 Zereth invaders. The numbers said annihilation. The reality playing out on the screen said otherwise. The humans weren't holding positions. They weren't forming defensive lines. They were moving constantly, appearing and disappearing, turning the station's layout into a maze of death. Every ambush was perfect, every engagement ended in seconds. The Zereth were being dismantled piece by piece. "What are they?" Vex's aide asked, watching Katie drop from an overhead pipe directly onto a Zereth officer, eliminating it before its guards could react. Vex remembered the human commander's words when they'd first arrived at the outpost, words it hadn't understood until now. "We weren't soldiers before we reached the stars. We were the thing that made everything else afraid of the dark." The Zereth were learning what that meant. The Zereth war leader Cromath stood in what had been the station's main cargo bay, surrounded by the bodies of his forward units. His thermal sensors showed nothing. His motion detectors remained silent. Yet his soldiers were dying, pulled into the darkness one by one, like prey animals taken by something unseen. "Regroup to defensive positions," he commanded, his voice carrying through the neural link all Zereth shared. "Establish overlapping fields of fire. Nothing moves without 3 warriors confirming the target." It was sound tactical doctrine, the kind that had won them countless battles. It should have worked. Corporal Danny Price watched from the shadows of a collapsed structural beam, his thermal suit masking his heat signature. He'd been a deer hunter in Montana before joining the military, spending weeks in the wilderness tracking elk through terrain that would kill the unprepared. This was just another hunt, except the prey had better weapons. He keyed his communicator twice, a silent signal. Across the bay, hidden in the tangle of cargo containers, Sergeant Lisa Morgan received it and began her count. 30 seconds. The Zereth formed a tight circle, weapons outward, scanning constantly. It was exactly what Danny had expected. Prey animals did the same thing when cornered. They bunched together, thinking numbers meant safety. They never looked up. At 15 seconds, Danny moved, not toward the Zereth, but away, deliberately scraping his boot against metal. The sound echoed through the bay. Every Zereth weapon swiveled toward it, their enhanced hearing pinpointing the location with perfect accuracy. They never saw Lisa drop from the ceiling rigging directly into their formation. She hit the deck rolling, her suppressed weapon firing in controlled bursts. 4 Zereth went down before the others could process what happened. By the time they turned inward, she was already moving, using their own bodies as cover, staying inside their firing lines where they couldn't shoot without hitting each other. Danny opened fire from his position, not to kill, but to create chaos. The Zereth formation broke, some charging toward him, others trying to track Lisa. They were reacting now, not thinking. That was when they were most vulnerable. Lisa vaulted over a fallen Xerath, grabbed a grenade from its harness, and threw it into the cluster of warriors trying to reorganize. The explosion wasn't large, but in the enclosed space it was devastating. She disappeared into a maintenance tunnel before the smoke cleared. Danny was already gone, moving to the next position. In another section of the station, Private Jake Collins and Private Amy Zhang were conducting their own operation. They'd found the Xerath Communications Hub, a hastily established command post in what used to be the station's hydroponics lab. 20 guards rotating patrols every 8 minutes, Amy whispered, watching through a fiber optic camera she'd threaded through an air vent. Command staff in the center, protected by shields. Jake studied the layout on his tactical display. Can't breach it directly. Too much firepower. Don't need to breach it, Amy replied, a slight smile crossing her face. Just need to make them think something's trying to. She pulled out a small device, something she'd assembled from spare parts and explosive charges. Jake raised an eyebrow. Is that going to do what I think it's going to do? If you think it's going to blow a hole in the eastern wall and decompress half this section, then yes. That'll kill everyone in there. Not if they evacuate to the sealed chambers first. Amy pointed to the emergency doors. They're not stupid. They'll save themselves and walk right into us. Now you're getting it. They planted the device and retreated to the emergency corridors, positioned at the exits the Xerath would use. When the explosive detonated, the sound was catastrophic. Alarms shrieked. The Xerath command staff bolted for the safe zones exactly as predicted. Jake and Amy were waiting. The engagement lasted 40 seconds. Neither human fired a shot. They'd rigged the corridors with monofilament wire at neck height, invisible and deadly. The Xerath ran straight into it at full speed. By the time the survivors realized what was happening, Jake and Amy had sealed the emergency doors, trapping them. Command hub is down, Amy reported over the communication network, moving to secondary objectives. Back in the command center, Vex watched the station's tactical display update. 60% of the Xerath force was now listed as casualties or missing. The remaining 40% was scattered, disorganized, and increasingly desperate. The humans had suffered 0 losses. How is this possible? Vex's aide demanded. The Xerath have superior numbers, superior weapons, superior physical capabilities. Vex studied the patterns emerging on the display. The humans never attacked where they were expected. They never fought fair. They used the environment, turned the Xerath's own strengths against them, exploited every psychological weakness. The Xerath evolved to hunt, Vex said slowly. They developed their tactics against prey that ran, that hid, that feared them. And humans? Humans evolved being hunted. They learned to fight things bigger, faster, and stronger than themselves. They learned patience. They learned to set traps. They learned that the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the sharpest claws. Vex gestured to the screens where Marcus Webb was leading a Xerath patrol into a section of the station the humans had rigged to collapse. It's the one that understands fear. The ceiling came down on the Xerath patrol. Marcus was already 3 corridors away before the dust settled. Chromath finally understood what was happening. His warriors weren't being defeated in battle. They were being eliminated, systematically and ruthlessly, by an enemy that had turned the entire station into a killing ground. An enemy that didn't think like soldiers. They thought like hunters, and the Xerath were the prey. Chromath made a decision that went against every instinct his species possessed. Fall back to the docking bay. Prepare for full evacuation. The retreat order rippled through the Xerath forces. Warriors who had never fled from any enemy began withdrawing, moving in tight formations toward the station's primary hangar. They left behind nearly 2,000 dead in the wreckage of their pride. Captain Helen Cruz intercepted the communications from her position in the station's upper levels. She'd been tracking Chromath specifically, waiting for this moment. The Xerath commander was smart, adaptable, exactly the kind of leader who would recognize a losing situation and extract his forces before total annihilation. She wasn't going to let that happen. All units, Xerath are moving to the docking bay for evacuation, Helen transmitted. Webb, take your team and secure the hangar exits. Morgan, seal off the alternate routes. Collins, Zhang, I need you to disable their ships. That's a lot of ground to cover, Marcus replied. They'll have hundreds of warriors in that bay. Then we make sure they can't leave, Helen said. This ends here. She checked her ammunition count and began moving toward the docking level. Her background was different from most of the others. While many had been hunters or outdoorsmen before the military, Helen had grown up in Chicago, in neighborhoods where survival meant reading people, understanding psychology, knowing when to fight and when to disappear. The skills translated better than anyone expected. The docking bay was massive, designed to accommodate dozens of ships simultaneously. Zarath had brought 5 heavy cruisers, each capable of carrying 600 warriors. Those ships represented their only escape route. Jake and Amy reached the hangar first, entering through a maintenance access point that opened into the engineering sublevel. The Zarath ships loomed above them, their hulls still warm from atmospheric entry. "Fuel lines are here," Amy said, studying the layout. "We cut those, they're not going anywhere. They'll have guards on the ships, so we don't go near the ships." Amy pulled out a compact cutting torch. "We go under them." They crawled through the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the hangar floor, moving from ship to ship. At each one, Amy cut through the fuel lines with surgical precision, letting the volatile chemicals drain into containment systems. Jake rigged small explosive charges to the landing gear supports. Above them, the Zarath began pouring into the hangar. Cromath stood at the center of his remaining forces, coordinating the evacuation. He'd lost more warriors in 6 hours than he had in 6 years of conquest. The humans had done something impossible. They'd broken the Zarath military machine with a force that should have been irrelevant. "Load the ships," he ordered. "We leave in 10 minutes. Marcus and his team sealed the main hangar doors, welding them shut from the outside. Katie positioned shaped charges on the emergency exits, ready to collapse them if needed. They were cutting off every escape route, funneling all 3,000 surviving Zarath into a single space. Lisa Morgan watched from the observation deck, her rifle trained on Cromath. One shot would end it, remove the commander, and throw the Zarath into chaos. But Helen had given specific orders. No one fires until everyone is in position. Helen herself was making her way through the ventilation system above the hangar, carrying something the others hadn't seen before, a gift from the Kralith commander who understood what the humans were planning and approved. Cromath noticed the sealed doors. His tactical awareness, honed through decades of warfare, triggered every alarm his biology possessed. This is a trap. Spread out, find alternate exits. The Zarath moved to comply, but every door they reached was either sealed or rigged to explode. The hangar had become a cage. Helen dropped from the ceiling onto the wing of one of the cruisers, standing in full view of the assembled Zarath forces. Every weapon turned toward her, hundreds of targeting lasers painting her position. "You're not leaving," she announced, her voice carrying across the hangar through the communication system. "You came here expecting easy prey. You found hunters instead." Cromath raised his primary weapon. "Kill her." The first volley of fire never reached Helen. She dropped back into cover before they could pull their triggers, but that wasn't the point. The point was to make them shoot, to make them reveal their positions, to confirm they were all exactly where she wanted them. "Now," Helen transmitted. Jake triggered the charges. The landing gear on all 5 ships collapsed simultaneously, bringing the massive vessels crashing to the hangar floor. The impact was tremendous. Zarath warriors dove for cover as multi-ton ships settled onto their bellies, crushing equipment and creating instant barriers across the bay. Amy ignited the fuel she'd released. Fire roared through the sublevel tunnels, venting up through floor grates and sheets of flame.
Zarath formations broke, warriors scrambling away from the inferno. Marcus blew the emergency exits, bringing tons of debris down to block them.
Katie detonated her charges on the observation deck supports, causing the entire structure to collapse into the hangar, creating more chaos. Lisa fired, not at Cromath, but at the hangar's atmospheric controls. The massive bay doors overhead, designed to open for ship departures, began cycling. Warning klaxons blared as the hangar prepared to decompress. The Zarath had nowhere to go. Their ships were disabled, the exits sealed, and the room was about to open to vacuum. They had seconds to find emergency suits or shelter. Helen appeared on the comm system again, her voice calm. "There are emergency pressure shelters in the northern section. You'll find them unlocked. Get your people to safety, Cromath. This isn't about killing you. It's about showing you what happens when you hunt humans." Cromath understood this entire operation had been about sending a message. The humans could have killed every Zarath in the hangar. Instead, they were offering survival with a condition. Acknowledge defeat. He made the hardest decision of his military career. All warriors proceed to emergency shelters. Surrender all weapons. The bay doors opened to space, but by then the Zarath were sealed in the pressure shelters, disarmed and defeated. The humans had won without firing another shot. 3 days later, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from 40 species gathered in the orbital station above the neutral world of Andros Prime, their holographic forms filling the massive chamber. The topic was singular and urgent: humanity. Ambassador Chen Li stood at the human delegation podium, her expression neutral as she listened to the accusations flying across the chamber. The Xerath ambassador, representing a species that had never known military defeat until now, was demanding sanctions, restrictions, even expulsion of humanity from the Council. They violated every principle of civilized warfare, the Xerath representative declared, his translator rendering his clicks and hisses into standard galactic common. They used deception, traps, psychological warfare. They refused honorable combat. They are not soldiers. They are barbarians. Chen Li waited until the chamber quieted before responding. The Xerath Dominion invaded a multi-species outpost without provocation, killed 300 civilians, and announced their intention to execute any survivors. When my people responded, we did so with the intent to preserve life and minimize casualties. The fact that we were effective shouldn't be grounds for condemnation. Effective? The Xerath ambassador's voice rose. You decimated a force 30 times your size using methods no honorable species would employ. We used the methods necessary to win, Chen Li replied. You're upset because we didn't fight the way you expected. You thought superior numbers and physical capability meant automatic victory. You learned otherwise. A Kralith representative activated their hologram. Commander Vex, now promoted and assigned as a liaison to the Council, spoke with careful precision. I was present at Outpost 72. I observed the human response firsthand. What the Xerath called dishonorable, I call tactically brilliant. The humans assessed the situation, recognized they were outmatched in direct combat, and adapted their strategy accordingly. By hiding in shadows like cowards, the Xerath ambassador spat. By using intelligence over brute force, Vex corrected. The Xerath have built their empire on the assumption that might makes right, that physical superiority determines victory. The humans proved that assumption wrong. That's not a violation of civilized warfare. That's evolution in practice. The chamber erupted in debate. Some species sided with the Xerath, concerned about the implications of humanity's combat methods. Others, particularly those who had suffered under Xerath aggression, saw the defeat as long overdue justice. Chen Li let them argue for several minutes before activating a priority override. The chamber fell silent. The Council has spent decades trying to contain the Xerath Dominion through diplomatic channels. Every attempt at negotiation has failed because the Xerath believe they cannot lose militarily. They've conquered 42 systems, enslaved billions, and ignored every treaty because they've never faced real consequences. She pulled up tactical data from the battle, displaying it across the chamber's central hologram. In 6 hours, 40 human soldiers disabled a Xerath invasion force without suffering a single casualty. We didn't do it through superior weapons or advanced technology. We did it through superior tactics, adaptability, and a fundamental understanding of warfare that most species have forgotten. And what understanding is that? Asked a representative from the Delphani Confederation, a species known for their philosophical approach to conflict. That war isn't about honor or glory, Chen Li said. It's about survival. It's about using every advantage, every tool, every bit of terrain and psychology to ensure your people live while your enemy loses the will to fight. Humanity spent 300,000 years learning that lesson on a planet that wanted us dead. We learned to hunt creatures faster and stronger than us. We learned to survive environments that should have killed us. We learned that the most dangerous weapon isn't the strongest, it's the smartest. Marcus Webb stood in the briefing room aboard the Earth Alliance cruiser watching the Council proceedings on a monitor. Next to him, Katie, Danny, Lisa, Jake, and Amy sat in various states of relaxation, still coming down from the adrenaline of the battle. Think they'll actually do something? Katie asked. Doesn't matter, Marcus replied. The message is out there now. The Xerath thought they were unstoppable. Now every species they've conquered knows they can be beaten. Danny pulled up reports flooding in from across the galaxy. Resistance movements on Xerath-occupied worlds were already mobilizing. Species that had surrendered without a fight were reconsidering their positions. The psychological impact of the Xerath defeat was rippling through dozens of systems. We didn't just win a battle, Lisa observed. We changed the equation. Every species that thought they couldn't fight back is rethinking that assumption. Good, Helen Cruz said, entering the room. She'd been debriefing with Earth Alliance Command, explaining the tactics and decisions that had led to victory. The galaxy needed to learn that bullies can be stopped. Back at the Council, the Xerath ambassador made one final attempt to control the narrative. The Council must recognize the danger humanity represents. They've demonstrated capabilities that threaten the established order. If allowed to continue unchecked, they will destabilize the entire galactic community. Chen-Li smiled slightly. Ambassador, you're absolutely right. We do threaten the established order. An order where might makes right, where aggressive species can conquer with impunity, where peaceful civilizations have no recourse against military superiority. That order needed threatening. She gestured to the battle data still displayed in the chamber. Humanity offers the galaxy an alternative. We're not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the most technologically advanced, but we understand adaptation. We understand that every challenge has a solution if you're willing to think creatively. We're willing to share that knowledge with anyone who wants to defend themselves against aggression. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. Humanity wasn't just offering military alliance. They were offering to teach other species how to fight like humans, how to turn disadvantages into advantages, how to make terrain and psychology into weapons. The Xerath ambassador realized too late what had happened. The defeat at Outpost 72 hadn't just damaged Xerath military prestige. It had created a template for resistance, a blueprint that any species could follow. The Dominion's empire, built on fear and superior force, was now vulnerable to an enemy it couldn't intimidate. Several ambassadors were already requesting private meetings with Chen-Li. The vote came 3 hours later. The council declined to sanction humanity. Instead, they established a new military advisory position and appointed Commander Vex to coordinate with human tactical specialists in developing defensive strategies for vulnerable species. The Xerath had demanded the galaxy condemn humanity. Instead, the galaxy had embraced them. 6 months after the battle at Outpost 72, the Xerath Dominion made its response. They assembled the largest invasion fleet in their history, 300 warships carrying 60,000 warriors, and launched a direct assault on Earth's outer colonies. The target was New Montana, a terraformed world with a population of 2 million humans and 500,000 allied species. The Xerath strategy was clear. Demonstrate overwhelming force, erase the memory of their previous defeat, and prove that the events at Outpost 72 were an anomaly. Admiral Patricia Kane received the alert in the Defense Command Center orbiting New Montana. She studied the incoming fleet on her tactical display and smiled coldly. The Xerath were doing exactly what human strategists had predicted they would do. They were coming in force, with pride and anger driving their decisions instead of tactical sense. They learned nothing, she said to her second-in-command, Colonel Frank Martinez. Should we evacuate the civilian population? Frank asked. No need, Patricia replied. This ends in 72 hours. Pass the word to all defense units. Execute Protocol Hunter. Protocol Hunter had been developed specifically for this scenario, combining everything humanity had learned about Xerath psychology with strategic innovations that built on the tactics used at Outpost 72. The difference was scale. This wasn't 40 soldiers defending a space station. This was an entire colony world preparing to demonstrate exactly what happened when humans had time to prepare. The Xerath fleet entered the system aggressively, weapons hot. Scanning for the human defense fleet they expected to meet in orbital combat. They found nothing. New Montana's orbit was empty except for commercial traffic and a few outdated patrol craft that immediately retreated. Cromath, commanding the invasion from the fleet flagship, felt suspicion crawl up his spine. He'd been demoted after the disaster at Outpost 72, but given a chance at redemption by leading this assault. He'd studied every second of footage from that battle, analyzed every human tactic, and prepared counter-strategies. This is wrong, he said to his staff. Where are their defenses? Scans show minimal military presence on the surface, his sensor operator reported. The colony appears undefended. It's a trap, Cromath insisted. The humans don't abandon their civilians, they're planning something. But his superiors, watching from the Xerath homeworld, overruled his caution. You will land forces immediately and secure the colony. No more delays. No more failures. The invasion began at dawn. Xerath dropships descended through New Montana's atmosphere in waves, landing outside the major population centers. 60,000 warriors deployed in textbook formation, establishing defensive perimeters and advancing toward the cities. They made it 3 kilometers before the first casualties occurred. The forests around New Montana's settlements weren't native growth. They'd been carefully cultivated over decades of terraforming, designed to specific requirements that included sightlines, natural choke points, and terrain features ideal for ambush tactics. The Xerath advance units walked into a kill zone that stretched across 100 square kilometers, Hidden weapons emplacements opened fire from concealed positions. Automated drones swept in from unexpected angles. The forest itself seemed to attack, with explosives buried beneath natural-looking paths and monofilament wire strung between trees at precisely calculated heights. But the real threat wasn't the automated defenses. It was the 20,000 human colonists who had spent 6 months training for exactly this scenario. Danny Price, now a training instructor, had taught 300 colonists the basics of wilderness warfare. They weren't professional soldiers. They were farmers, engineers, teachers, and merchants who had learned to use their knowledge of the terrain against an invading force. A Zareth squad advanced through a narrow valley, following what appeared to be the path of least resistance. The valley walls erupted with gunfire from positions the Zareth scanners had marked as empty stone. By the time they realized the walls were lined with camouflaged fighting positions, half the squad was down. The survivors retreated directly into a secondary ambush, where colonists had dammed a stream and released it at precisely the right moment, flooding the valley floor and washing the Zareth into prepared kill zones. Lisa Morgan, coordinating defensive operations from the Central Command bunker, watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The Zareth were repeating their mistakes from Outpost 72 on a massive scale. They expected conventional warfare, static defense lines they could overwhelm with superior numbers. Instead, they faced an entire population that had been trained to think like hunters. In the cities, the few Zareth units that penetrated the outer defenses found themselves in urban environments designed with defense in mind. Buildings had reinforced firing positions, streets could be sealed with blast doors. Every intersection was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Jake and Amy, now running tactical workshops for civilian defense units, had helped design the urban defense grid. When the Zareth entered the cities, they found themselves in a maze, where every advantage belonged to the defenders. One Zareth company tried to advance down a main avenue. Shape charges dropped the buildings on both sides, creating instant barriers and cutting the company into isolated segments. Defenders picked them apart from elevated positions while automated systems jammed their communications. Another unit attempted to capture the power station, thinking taking infrastructure would force surrender. They found the power station was already rigged to explode, with human defenders ready to detonate it rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The Zareth withdrew, unwilling to destroy the very infrastructure they'd come to capture. Chromath watched his invasion fall apart in real time. His forces were taking catastrophic casualties against an enemy that refused to mass for battle. Every advance met resistance from unexpected directions. Every position his warriors captured turned out to be a trap. The humans weren't defending their colony. They were bleeding his forces dry, one engagement at a time. "Full retreat to the ships," he ordered, making the same decision he'd made 6 months ago. "We're leaving." But Patricia Kane had anticipated this too. As the Zareth forces withdrew toward their landing zones, they found human forces had circled behind them, cutting off escape routes and forcing them into narrower and narrower corridors. The retreat became a rout. Zareth warriors abandoned heavy weapons to move faster. Command structures broke down. Panic spread through the neural network connecting the Zareth forces. When Chromath's flagship finally managed to extract the survivors 3 days later, he'd lost 45,000 warriors. The humans reported 237 casualties, mostly from the initial automated defense systems before human forces fully engaged. The aftermath was transmitted across the galaxy in real time. Every species watching saw the same truth. Humanity hadn't won through luck or surprise. They'd won because they understood warfare at a fundamental level that most spacefaring species had forgotten. The Galactic Council's emergency session was brief. The Zareth Dominion's seat was suspended, pending a full investigation into their aggressive expansion. 36 species formally requested human military advisors. 5 former Zareth colony worlds declared independence, confident they could defend it with human training. Chen Li stood before the council again, but this time she wasn't defending humanity's methods. She was offering a new vision for galactic security. "The galaxy has been dominated by the strong for too long," she said. "Humanity offers an alternative. Not conquest through superior force, but defense through superior strategy. We'll teach anyone who wants to learn. We'll help any species that wants to protect itself. The age of predator species ruling through fear is over." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The galaxy demanded soldiers to fight its wars. Humanity sent something better. We sent teachers. We sent hunters who understand that the best victory is the one where your enemy loses the will to fight. We sent the future." In the new Montana Command Center, Patricia Kane watched the council proceedings and allowed herself a small smile. The Zareth had come seeking revenge and found only defeat. But more importantly, they'd proven humanity's point to the entire galaxy. You didn't need to be the biggest or strongest to win. You just needed to be smarter, more adaptable, and willing to use every advantage. Marcus Webb sat in a classroom on Earth, teaching a mixed group of human and alien recruits the fundamentals of tactical thinking. On the board behind him was a simple phrase that summed up everything humanity had brought to the galaxy. The perfect hunt ends with prey that never knew it was being hunted. The Zirath had learned that lesson twice. The rest of the galaxy was learning it now. And humanity, patient and adaptive as always, was ready to teach anyone willing to learn that survival wasn't about strength. It was about understanding that every predator, no matter how powerful, could become prey if the hunter was smart enough. The galaxy had demanded soldiers. Humanity had sent something far more dangerous. They'd sent an idea. And ideas, once released, could never be conquered.